So it's interesting. Chuck Todd, it was announced last year that he was leaving Meet the Press. Well, he was actually back on Meet the Press, but this time as the guest. So it's just weird. It's weird because the entire time I was watching this, I'm like, you used to be sitting in that chair. But he was back on Meet the Press to discuss, Biden showing in the Michigan primary and what he thinks is going to happen in the general election from here. I'm actually going to debunk some of the things that Chuck Todd said in this interview, because there's a couple of things I noticed that he did not mention that I just read a couple of days ago that I think you guys might want to see. So let's go ahead and get into this segment here. This is Meet the Press. And Chuck Todd is not the host. He is the guest.
Joining me now on set to discuss all of the big stories in politics is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. Chuck, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So let's start off by talking about Michigan. You could argue there are warning signs for both parties in Michigan, but let's talk about Democrats, because I think that's kind of where most of the focus has been. You have these 100,000 uncommitted votes. You and I spoke about this earlier. You said you were watching to see if it got up to 30%. Didn't get that high, but still not insignificant.
I think it really depends. If you portray it as 100,000 votes, it sounds more significant than if you say they didn't win a single delegate.
Yeah.
Right.
Pause. Okay, so this is Chuck Todd being disingenuous, and she's being disingenuous too. 100,000 uncommitted votes in Michigan. When I covered this last week, one of the things I explained to you is that, yes, there have always been protest votes in Michigan during the primary. However, there has not been one since we went all the way back to 2008, I think, not been one since going back to 2008 that has been this high. Not for Obama's reelection, not even for Trump's reelection. Over 100,000 people voted uncommitted. So this is Chuck Todd's job, to carry weight for the Democratic Party. So he's trying to reassure Democrat voters and Biden supporters that everything is fine, that it's not significant. And they already, let the cat out the bag when they actually mentioned, I think it was on MSNBC, that they're not even going to focus on those voters anyway. The plan is for the Biden administration to focus on the suburban areas in Michigan. So they're going to go after the soccer moms just like they did in the Atlanta suburbs in 2020. So they don't care about the people that are working class. They don't care about the people that are calling for a ceasefire. They're not going to entertain these people at all. They're going to focus on the suburban areas, and that's what they're hoping to win. But there is a problem, and I'll get to that in just a second. Let me let him continue here.
Didn't make threshold of 15%, right? So it really, I think a lot of it has to do with, it's like, I don't want to take anything away from the activists and their passion on what the message that they wanted to send. But if you're the Biden campaign and you're just looking at this through a political lens, this could have been a lot worse. This could have been, this was a free vote. Bernie Sanders' organization was helping. You had Beto O'Rourke. So I look at all of this sort of somewhat institutional support that the protesters got, including from at least one sort of news organization, and they still only got, So I think that to a certain community, this is really highly important. But I think it's contained as a political problem. This could have metastasized. I sort of look at it the same way I look at the New Hampshire write-in effort.
Let me pause for a second. Notice how he said it's contained, right? So the 100,000 uncommitted votes, it's not contained. The uncommitted campaign is spreading across the country. Pennsylvania has already launched their own abandoned Biden campaign, their own uncommitted campaign. I just saw something earlier today. This is from the Boston PSL chapter. They're telling people also to vote uncommitted in Massachusetts. So it's actually not contained, Chuck. And also, why are you saying contained as though this is a virus? We've contained it. We've stopped it from spreading. That's what Chuck thinks.
All the ingredients were there to really embarrass Biden. Yeah. All the ingredients in Michigan were there to embarrass him. And just the opposite happened. Mm-hmm. They not only contained it in some ways, he showed far more strength than I expected. So that's, I'm trying to, I don't want to somehow say, oh, well, the protest movement, came up short. I just think there are certain people this might be a voting issue for, but it's a much smaller group of voters than I think many people realize.
Yeah, and it didn't meet.
This is really interesting because as I'm watching this, like I said before, when I first saw this, he used to be in that chair, So it's like, to me, it's weird that he's the guest on this show. And it reminded me, I was thinking of this song my dad used to play called Used to Be My Girl. You guys ever heard the song? It's like an old school, used to be my girl, used to be my girl. And I was sitting there, I was watching this and I was like, Chuck is sitting there thinking, that used to be his chair. Used to be my chair. Used to be my chair.
That 30% mark that you were
well, that to me is because we've seen 20% in the past. Right, this is a free vote. Right. If you got into the 30s, that's a whole different story. Then you have a third of the party. This is why Nikki Haley being in the 30s is a much bigger deal to Donald Trump.
I mean, how big of a deal are these numbers for Trump? How big of a warning sign in a general election? The fact that in some of these states, he's missing out on 40% of the voters.
Well, and look,
pause here. So another thing I want to mention, too, that they conveniently left out, Dean Phillips still got over like 20,000 votes in Michigan. Marianne Williamson got more votes than Dean Phillips did. And she wasn't even, this was after she suspended her campaign. And then she decided to unsuspend it. But they're not even mentioning that, though. They're just looking at Biden received 81% in the primary. But again, that's in the primary. That doesn't mean he's going to perform that way in the general. In fact, I'm going to show you that he's not, according to the numbers right now.
I think Trump actually should feel a little bit better about his performance in Michigan. I mean, she didn't get 40. Right. In fact, she got under 30 this time. Yeah. And to me, Michigan, again, talk about a state that was designed for her to do well in, right? Open primary, the rules were allowed. I actually think the Democrats who decided to stay voting in the Democratic primary probably hurt Haley a little bit.
Look at this, guys. So let me tell you what they're doing. So Chuck Todd, he's actually focusing on, he's saying that Nikki Haley's 26.5% is actually more significant than the 100,000 people that voted uncommitted against Joe Biden. You see how he made that pivot? Just pivot. Just like that. Okay. So here's the problem, folks. Nikki Haley hasn't won one state. Not one. Nikki Haley doesn't even have a Republican base. That's another thing. She didn't capture a base of the party. Donald Trump still has the largest base of that party, right? Also, why is he mentioning that her 26.5% is significant? But if you take what Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson received in Michigan, which is more than this, when you put them together, that's not significant. Actually, not more than that, but still. They're not even talking about that. They're not even mentioning it at all. Now, we know there's no pathway forward for either of them, but he's pretending like there's still a pathway forward for Nikki Haley in the Republican Party, and we know there isn't. She hasn't won one state.
You think about it, if she got the same amount of Democratic crossover into the Michigan Republican primary that she got in New Hampshire, my guess is she is in the high 30s or low 40s. But these are Republicans who already know he's going to be the nominee, who already know she can't win the nomination, who are still wanting to show up to the poll to vote against Trump. And once you do.
No, those are not Republicans. You see, this is why we have to debunk mainstream media's narrative. as I've shown you on the show multiple times before, the majority of people voting for Nikki Haley are not Republicans. We saw that with New Hampshire. We've seen this with South Carolina. The majority of the Republicans are obviously voting for Donald Trump. Nikki Haley has captured a lot of independents. She's also captured some Democrats. There are some Democrats voting for Nikki Haley because they don't want Donald Trump to win the primary. But here's Chuck Todd just openly lying to you.
Once you vote against Trump once, it's easy to keep voting against him.
Right.
It's a little bit harder. So I think when you look at these two situations, it's not even a close call. Yeah. Trump's got a much bigger problem than Biden. And going into this, I wasn't 100% sure. My gut was that this wasn't going to be what some people thought it was on the left. And it turned out to be what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
I think it's also disingenuous for him to say that Trump has a much bigger problem than Joe Biden. No, Joe Biden is the incumbent president, and his approval rating is lower than Obama's was when he ran for re-election. It's lower than Trump's was when he ran for re-election. Joe Biden is the one that has the biggest problem right now. There's also the fact that I told you before, this uncommitted campaign is not contained just to Michigan, as he told you it was. It's also rising up in Pennsylvania. I saw messages today from Massachusetts. This is going to spread into other states. So Chuck Todd sitting here and pretending like Joe Biden does not have a problem, he's lying to you. But this is what Chuck is paid to do.
One of your obsessions, my obsessions, what's going to happen with a third party candidate. You have a great column out. I'm going to read a little bit of it. You're basically saying the wind has come out of the sails for a third party candidate. You write, the debate over abortion access is something that's always been debated within the frame of the two parties. If abortion is the issue for a large chunk of swing voters, then they aren't going to be interested in a third party's compromise position, no matter what that position is. If abortion is a voting issue for someone, they'll have a definitive position on which party they want making reproductive health laws and appointing judges. The case for a third party alternative for this election cycle is over. There's just not a market for it, given the current issue terrain. And I'll add one more note. You have big names like Joe Manchin and Larry Hogan who are out of the mix. Right. So there's not really a candidate.
No, there's not. And I go back.
Here they are lying again. Okay. What do the polls show you? Okay. Number one, not everyone has abortion as their number one issue. In fact, most Americans that were polled say the economy is their number one issue. The economy, imagine that. This is the first time I've seen where foreign policy is in the top 3. Abortion is not in the top 2. So the Democratic Party, they are banking on the abortion issue to help Joe Biden become reelected in November. Here's the problem, though. Yes, a lot of female voters may look at that as something like, oh my God, I got to go out there and I got to vote for the Democrats because I don't want to, I want them to fix the abortion issue. But some of the people that I've been talking to actually on the ground, they said, well, the Supreme Court already kicked it back to the states. My state's fine. They didn't change any rules here in my state. I'm fine. And then there's also the fact that for people who live in a ballot initiative state, some of these states have already put forth ballot measures to make sure that the women keep their right to choose in their state. We saw this with Kansas. That's not a blue state. So I don't think the abortion issue is going to work the way that the Democratic Party thinks it's going to work. That may have helped them during the midterms. But now, again, when you look at the polls, the number one issue for voters is the economy, not abortion. What a mess.
Back to, one of the whole pitches of No Labels is, hey, we want to sort of like turn the temperature down and find some middle ground. Right now in abortion, you're either for access or you want to restrict access.
He said for abortion, you either for access or you want to restrict access. Now, why can't he apply that same method to genocide? Because I would say you're either for genocide or against genocide. Who's the one that's aiding the genocide? That's Joe Biden. See, this is where they get into trouble. I don't think that Joe Biden is going to have the support from young voters the way that he did in 2020. I don't think that's going to happen. And I already have seen numbers that show he's not going to get the support from the African-American community the way that he did in 2020. So what they're going to do is they're going to bank on white suburban moms to pull Joe Biden across the finish line. But I don't know if that's going to be enough for him this time around.
We're not in a debate about weeks right now. That isn't the conversation. This is a different conversation. IVF has sort of brought that into the fold here. So right now, that's where if abortion was considered settled, sort of the way same-sex marriage is, and I know that certain advocates are worried that it could get revisited, but it's for a lion's share of the electorate, it's settled.
Yeah.
So okay, that wouldn't be a concern of it. Can you imagine? No Label's trying to come up with a ticket that one is for access to abortion and one is against access to abortion. It just doesn't. There is no scenario to me that this makes any sense if abortion is as urgent of an issue as it is, and it is.
And just to put a fine point on.
To who? See, this is where I feel like they are out of touch with the everyday worker, the everyday American. It's an urgent issue for who? If you were to poll women and you poll men, is abortion an urgent issue for men? Are they going to put that as their number one issue? I don't even think some of the women would put that as their number one issue right now. This is what happens when you don't hit the streets and talk to people on the ground. Everyone that I have spoken to said they are more concerned about the economy. They're more concerned about putting food on the table. They're more concerned about the expensive grocery prices. That's the number one thing that people are saying. Nobody has come to me and has said to me their number one issue is abortion. And that includes women that I've spoken to. This is all the narrative control. This is what they want you to believe. They want you to think this is the number one urgent issue for everybody. It's not. We'll go on just a little bit more here, and then I'm going to show you some numbers.
If we weren't in a post-Roe world, there could potentially still be a lane for a third party.
I completely agree, but I really think that abortion, because the voters know, hey, this is the jersey color matters here, and who appoints these judges, who makes these laws. This is one of those. The voters are pretty educated here, and I think they know that the third party actually distracts from this specific issue.
Yeah. Well, it will be fascinating to watch. Chuck,
right.
Thank you. Thank you.
That used to be my chair. Chuck is saying that used to be his chair. But listen, it's really interesting to me that they're continuing to spread this lie. Because the reality is they're hoping that American voters, particularly Democrat voters, are going to feel threatened about the abortion issue, and that's going to push people out to the polls. That's what they're hoping will happen. And I believe the Democratic Party actually had that card in their back pocket for this day. They kept that in their back pocket. Listen, Roe v. Wade could have been codified under Bill Clinton, under Barack Obama. Barack Obama said it would be the first thing that he would do. And then when he was elected, he changed his mind. He said he couldn't do it because of Lieberman, but he could have ended the filibuster. These are all excuses. These are all excuses. Chris says, you're exactly right, Sabs. They are trying to appeal to the professional managerial class who are typically neo-libs. Right. I'm telling you, the people that they're trying to reach like those suburban moms. Eric, can you exit me out of, I don't know why I can't exit out. Oh, there it is. Okay. I think I just made it too big. I don't know what I did. Anyhow, I want to show you some of the numbers because this is what they're not showing you. But thankfully, we have Case Study QB. Because you see, right now, okay, they're talking about the primary, right? The Michigan poll for 2024 for the general election has Donald Trump at 45% and Joe Biden at 41%. And they know abortion is on the table. But this just backs up what I said before, which is that for a lot of people that I have spoken to, abortion is not the number one urgent issue. It's the economy. Why do you guys think Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden in all these swing states? In all the swing states. So Chuck Todd isn't going to show you this. When he's bragging about the 81% or whatever that Joe Biden got in Michigan, and he's trying to make it sound like those 100,000 uncommitted votes are insignificant and that is contained or whatever, that's the primary, man. He's not telling you what the numbers show for the general election for Michigan. Just between Trump and Biden. So keep in mind, this is not including RFK or Jill Stein or Cornel West, any of the third party candidates. Those numbers change and more pulls away from Biden once you add them in as well. And here's another problem they're not telling you about. Wavering black voters. Biden is flawed and Trump is unacceptable. So here's another thing that Chuck Todd is leaving out. Months of polling have shown a segment black voters a key part of Biden's base, souring on his performance and growing more open to voting against the Democrat than in any recent presidential election. They are more open to voting against the Democrat more than any recent presidential election. But Chuck Todd leaves that out. The Democrat candidate cannot win without the black vote. The Republican Party doesn't have to worry about that. They're going to win with or without the black vote. The Democratic Party, however, cannot win without the black vote. And they know that. So don't you think it's a little strange that Chuck sat there and he's leaving this information out and he's making it seem like everybody's going to come out and support Joe Biden in the end anyway, because abortion is the urgent issue. It goes on to say here, let's go down to because they did a focus group. In a head-to-head matchup between Biden and Trump, only one of the 14 focus group participants affirmatively said they'd back Trump. But when the ballot was expanded to include RFK, Cornel West, Jill Stein, 2 said they'd vote for Kennedy, and 1 each chose West and Stein. The result echoed some recent polling. The NBC News poll showed that 75% of black registered voters saying they'd support Biden in 2024. Now, let me pause there. I just want to highlight that part right there. Oh, I guess I can't highlight this. Oh, well. I guess I can't highlight on this site. Oh, yeah, I can do on CBS. Anyway, 75% of black voters said they'd support Joe Biden in 2024. Okay. All right. Let me tell you why that's a problem. Joe Biden had over 80, I think it was 83-ish% of the black vote in 2020. Donald Trump's percentage with the black community has increased since 2020. 16% said they'd back Trump. Similar results to past NBC News surveys and other polls. That represents a dip among the group from 2020, 85, when 85% of black voters surveyed said they'd back Biden and 7% said they'd back Donald Trump. So some of the black voters who supported Joe Biden in 2020 have moved over to supporting Donald Trump. How do you lose? And I want to make a comparison to Barack Obama. How do you lose 10% of the black support? And it might even be lower than that. He went from 85% to 75% now. Okay, let's make the comparison with Barack Obama. Obama did not have that type of a dip. If I remember correctly, I believe Barack Obama got 95% of the black vote. And during re-election, it was like 92, 93%. He didn't lose 10%. And Obama didn't do anything really for black people. And black wealth tanked under Barack Obama's presidency. So, Joe, you know, you really made some people upset You really pissed some people off. It goes on to say here, it says the majority think that Trump is racist. Indeed, the group views on Trump were stark, particularly after the participants were shown recent comments the former president made last weekend at an event for Black conservatives. Trump pointed to his criminal indictments and said, that's why Black people like me, because they viewed me as I'm being discriminated against. And I pushed back on that last week. And I told you guys that is not what Black people have been saying. What they had said is that they feel like it's a witch hunt, right? None of the participants said Trump understood the concerns of Black Americans, and 9 of the 14 said he is racist. But here's the thing. The people that they spoke to in that focus group, we're not to say that they're going to support Donald Trump. What is more likely to happen is that they are going to stay home. And here's another thing that Chuck Todd so conveniently left out that everybody needs to see. The choice for president among African American voters. It's a damn shame. Joe Biden should be embarrassed. Here's another poll. This is the Quinnipiac poll. Biden has 56% among African American voters. Donald Trump, 15%. RFK Jr., 13%. And Cornel West, 13%. So this is why I continue to push back on the narrative from mainstream media, because these numbers are very telling. Joe Biden has lost, where are my math people in the chat? 15, 13, 13, 26, 26 and 15. Looking at almost 40 something percent. A little over 40%. When you total up Donald Trump, RFK, and Cornel West percent of the Black vote. Now that's assuming that things stay the same and nobody drops out of the race. We don't know what's going to happen. But I'm willing to argue if RFK Jr. drops out, which I don't think he's going to, based on what I'm going to show you with the next story. If RFK Jr. drops out, I would assume a lot of these voters would go over towards Donald Trump or maybe the Libertarian candidate. If Cornel West drops out, some of these voters will go over to Joe Biden, and I think the others will stay home. So Joe Biden does have a reason to be concerned, unlike what Chuck Todd told you. Remember, they're paid to paint that narrative. He's not going to get on there and say Joe Biden is in trouble. Like he's not going to say that, right?